Now we move into local board input, and staying in the west, we have first up our Waitakere Rangers local board. Do we have you on board there, Chair Presland?
Morena and Atamario.
Kia ora.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the second opportunity to present to Council on this matter, and it relates to the future of the land at 300 West Coast Road, which is for consideration at today's meeting. You may recall I presented earlier at a workshop to discuss the matter, but I wanted to augment what I said there with some visual displays of the area and the significance of the zoning. If we could go to the next slide, please. This is the unitary plan map showing the area. The dark orange is zoned terraced housing and apartment buildings. The pink is the town centre zone, and the purple is light industry. You can see that the area is large, and intensification is appropriate for the area because the Glen Eden railway station is pretty well smack bang in the middle of it. And when the CRL is complete, it will take about half an hour to travel from Glen Eden to the middle of town, and that is why intensification of this area is so appropriate. But it does make the provision of open space even more important. There is significant development occurring now. There are two 10-storey apartment towers currently being completed, and there's a further 6-storey tower block which is under construction. And there's also fairly intense development on sections in Routley Drive and Brandon Road as two examples, although throughout the area there's a lot of work that's happening. Next slide, please. This is a closer view of the area. The green space is the Harold Moody Reserve, which is primarily used for league and softball, although there is a playground there. There is some existing recreational areas, but for current purposes it copes, but for intensification purposes our concern is that it just won't cope. The next slide, please. This is an aerial photograph of the area. The subject land is in green to the top left of the map. The red lines show access to the site. There is the danger that if the West Coast Road frontage part of the land was sold off, then the area may become mostly landlocked. There is currently access to the right, but this depends on goodwill of neighbours, and we could conceivably strike a situation in the future where if part was sold and neighbours stopped access, then the only way into the area would be from the route on the left. This map also shows some of the developments that are occurring. The circle to the upper right shows the location of the two towers with 160 apartments ready to be opened. Further to the right, closer to the bottom of the map, shows the location of the 6-storey apartment building being constructed. And the third circle, which is close to the area, is another area where there are plans for apartments, although that project has currently been stalled. But this map does show the intensification that is happening already. Next slide, please. So to summarise, the town centre is subject to considerable intensification. It's a significant growth area surrounded by terraced housing and apartment building zone. There are 240 apartments either being completed or under development or being planned. The West Light apartments are nearly ready. Kaingaroa apartments will be due later this year. And because of that, green space and good connection is a priority in our view. Next slide, please. So just to summarise, we note our preference is that council retains the whole site to support growth. The land may have limited sale value. It's an old dump and there are expensive remediation required before it is sold. There are Public Works Act considerations and there is an offer back requirement. Our view is that we do need to retain the land so that we can protect future greenways links. And the land is also strategically significant in that it's close to the town centre's cultural precinct, with the library, the theatre and other communities buildings nearby. So thank you, Madam Chair. That's all that I wish to say. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question first from Councillor Watson, Patai.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Greg, and that presentation was very useful, especially as it goes to clearly identifying the extent of the intensification that's occurring there. I've got two questions that are related. The first one goes to the notion that the local board is still really working on its vision for Glen Eden at the moment, and obviously taking in this massive intensification and the practicalities of access from West Coast Road. So I guess my comment really and question to you is given the jigsaw that's emerging here, how desirable is it that the fate of this property is at least delayed until they have maybe you're a clearer vision of the overall area and how it fits together in light of the intensification, and also the practicalities of what the conceivable return would be. So, you know, if this is a minimal return, then why would you proceed given the wider dynamic that's at work there? So there's a couple of questions in there, Greg.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Certainly we agree that we believe a delay is important. We do have our one local initiative, which is the construction of a town square in the area, not far from this particular part. And that's another part of the jigsaw. That, there's so much happening in Glen Eden right now, and the pressures from intensification already are showing, and that's why we think that council does need to just put a hold on things and hold the land, just so that it can see how the development is going, and then work out what the optimal use for the land is. And just on your second point, I agree. I don't see that the land has much financial value at this stage, but it could have significant strategic value in future years. And that's why I would suggest that there is a very good reason to hold on to it for now.
Kia ora. Next, Patai, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll probably ask this question of staff as well, but while you're here, Chair, I thought I'd ask you as well. So I've since had discussions with the Glen Eden Bowling Club, who back onto that land, and they've explained to me that the land forms a fairly popular path between intensified housing behind the club itself, and then West Coast Road. So in your view, is it possible to retain part of the site but protect a greenways path so that people still have access to the road?
Certainly the current proposal is to keep at least part of the land where that informal walkway is, and part of the local board's greenways plan is to develop that properly. To the left of that land is a reasonably intensive development with a number of houses there, and we really do want to get people walking into the village rather than driving, which is the current mode they normally use. So yes, retention of that part of the land, which is next to the bowling club, is vital. But the trouble is, if we sell the road frontage, it could become landlocked. It could be a road to nowhere, because if the properties to the right stop pedestrian access, then you won't be able to get to the village by using the land, because the roadside would have gone.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate the point, because when we're talking about the potential and a lot of landlocking a site, just looking at the map here, I guess my question is driving at walking, cycling links through that potentially landlocked section of the site. So thank you for that. That's very informative.
Kia ora, thank you. Patai, Councillor Dalton.
Kia ora, Greg, just in terms, I have some empathy in terms of intensification and losing green space. Could you tell me how many apartments, first of all, the Kāinga Ora apartments, how many are there and what are they? Are they single? Are they 2 bedrooms?
I can't tell you the exact numbers. With the current two apartment buildings being developed. There's 160 there. From memory, I think there's about 60 in the Kaingaroa development. It's 6-storey, primarily for older adults. So from memory, most of them are single bedroom developments.
And could
And
you
there are other,
sorry.
actually, Michelle Clayton from the board's very helpfully just messaged 47 Kaingaroa one-bedroom apartments. So 47, not 60.
Right. And just remind me, I remember we did have a workshop on it, but the proximity of the other green spaces and to this one?
Relatively close. If you look back at slide 2,
Yeah, thank you.
that will show the green space very close to the middle. But that's primarily a sports field, although it does have some playground there.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, councillor. Member Wilcox, Patai.
Ai, e hiana koutou i te whenua nei, hei wāhi ki te hikoi atu, ki te haere atu ki tēnā, hei mea oki, hei mea mō ngā paparehia kē, tēnā taku pātai ki awe.
That question was, where is the closest sports park to this property, or is it open space you're wanting for walking?
Tēnā koe, Glenn. Primarily, we do want it to be retained for greenways purposes, which means keeping the West Coast Road access open. We can see it also being used as a park in the future. Population in the area is just going to shoot up as time goes by, and that's why we believe that preserving every piece of open space that we have in the area is so important. It's very close to the middle of the township, and we don't think it has much economic value currently, but it does have huge strategic value.
Kia ora, thank you. All right there, Member Wilcox? Kapai? Great, thank you. With no further questions then, I'd like to officially thank Chair President for his presentation. Councillor Henderson, would you like to second that? Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Against?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. We
Thank
move
you,
on
Madam
now.
Chair. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you. We move now to the Waiheke Local Board, and I welcome Chair Handley. Are you with us, Chair?
Tēnā koutou tātou ngā mihi o te ata, ngā mihi ki a koe, Desley, kia ora koutou, ko Kath Taku Ingoa. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I want to just follow up, maybe draw together, as Papa has suggested, the threads between the speakers, Hayden Solomon on behalf of the Ngāti Paoa Iwi Trust, Paul Carew from the Waiheke Housing Trust, and Julie Cairns from the Waiheke Health Trust. The commonality between these three is in fact the local board. So it is only recently that this land has been freed from the feasibility study for the community swimming pool, and it's really only, and that was in June this year. So this is, people are working very quickly, and obviously everybody, the three speakers all know of this opportunity and see it as such. So I appreciate that this is disruptive in terms of the intentions, so which I did say at the workshop last week. I entirely appreciate that. But there is social need. I do want to address, just in terms of Ngāti Paoa, we work very closely with the Ngāti Paoa iwi board as well as the Ngāti Paoa Trust board, but in this case it's the iwi board that has very recently been mandated by Ministers Little and Mahuta as the settlement entity for Ngāti Paoa. And so, therefore, in this case, this is that they are the right entity for us to be working with. The Health Trust mentioned Piratahi Marae. They do work very closely with Piratahi. Piratahi is not a Ngāti Pawa Marae. It is an unusual entity in that it is pan-tribal, but Ngāti Pawa does sit on the trust board and within the Ngāti Pawa, the Piratahi Komiti Marae. So there is a very close relationship there, but I do appreciate that Julie being dropped in the deep end with respect to the relationship in this instance with Ngāti Pawa. It is the local board that is that we see ourselves as beholden to work through these things and to ensure that there is alignment, but at the end of the day, if there isn't alignment and there is competition, that also is not a bad thing when you're disposing of property. Having said that, I do want to just go over some questions that were raised last time by councillors. And I think in particular, Councillor Hills questioned Downer's dependency on the existing site. I just want to maybe alleviate those concerns, and that Downers recently took up got a temporary lease, which is for 2 years, for a much bigger site. I think Downers is very clearly aware of that the site was going to come under pressure as a council-owned site in the main business village or commercial village of Ostend. So they have a much larger site currently where they are storing bulk supplies. It was questioned if they then would have to move their equipment off Waiheke and just bring it over. Their equipment is essentially just basic maintenance equipment. Specialist equipment is already bought over for all jobs. So because obviously the island's infrastructure is too small for Downers to be holding specialist equipment here for the island. So that is brought over, and they do waves of projects simultaneously, which are all planned by them. So that isn't a consideration in this case. I think the other thing is that Downers is a very large commercial enterprise, a national one that holds the Waiheke contract for with Auckland Transport at the moment. So it is a contractor to council through AT. And I'm quite sure that they shouldn't qualify for special consideration, and that they have already advised Panuku they want to buy it over Waiheke social needs and commercial indeed. They could in fact do what other commercial entities on Waiheke do, which is to purchase or lease existing commercial property, which itself is in scarce supply, as is all property. But they could do that rather than retain land in the centre of the Ostend village. I know that I gather in the papers that it says that this property isn't listed in our current local board plan. I think that's somewhat misleading, because the community swimming pool project is listed, and the property was subject at the time of that drawing up that plan to the feasibility study for the community swimming pool during the last term. And that only culminated, as I said, in June this year in a board decision in favour of one of the other 2 sites, which was subject to that feasibility. What is in the new draft local board plan is the Ostend precinct planning. And this land forms part of that plan. So I do commend to you the opportunity here to hold on the purchase, but within this financial year. Obviously, all parties are determined to see if they can have their aspirations met. That will require time. My sense is that Paul Carew was right with his 9 months. My preference, because there is Christmas, New Year, it will take some time to determine whether or not these entities climb into full feasibility studies and bulk and location and detailed design and sale and purchase agreements. They will all take time, so we shouldn't and you can't rush those. So thank you. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Kia ora, Chair.
Oh,
Thank you.
by the way, I should just say the previous comment made by somebody on the sidelines that Waiheke is full of lunatics might indicate that we should be building mental health facility on that land. Thank you.
Moving right along. Right, kia ora, thank you. Questions for Chair Handley? Councillor Coe.
Tēnā koe hia mana, Kath. Thank you for coming
ora.
along and presenting today. I just wondered, you did touch on in terms of the aspirations of the local board for the site in the context of the Austin town centre. Could you just kind of place the site in terms of the town centre and why a housing health centre type development would be far more appropriate for the location rather than a depot as it's currently being used for? Kia ora.
Yes, thank you, kia ora. The site is directly behind land on Belgium Street. Belgium Street is the main road through Waiheke. In Ostend, it is very close to our local board office. It's behind our local board office and the council service centre. And it is an easy walk for anybody if they were less able than others to access both the supermarket and also it is now the transport hub where all our buses pass through directly outside this location. So in we're a fragmented, dispersed residential area, but along a main route, so this is close to that main route. It does also lend itself, the health centre is already here in that area, and as Julie indicated, they need to extend what they've got. So this, and for us, community housing sits at the top of community need and is expressed pretty universally through submissions in both our local board plan and our area plan, draft area plan. But these are the things that need to be in a village rather than bulk gravel and so on, provisions for road maintenance and truck depots. So increasingly, this is where Oniroa, the other village, is more the kind of commercial visitor destination. This is shaping up, has in the last few years shaped up to be very much the heart of kind of residential service centre for Waiheke.
Kia ora,
Does that answer your question, Councillor Coombe?
Kia ora, thank you. Yes, I think that's very useful.
Thank you. Next partai, Councillor Cooper.
Kia ora, thank you, Kath. I'm just a bit confused. As a local board, you're kind of saying, oh, well, it doesn't matter about a bit of competition. So if it came to it what I don't quite know what you're supporting. So I can hear you're supporting the community housing. But if Ngāti Poa purchased and then didn't, where does that leave you as a local board? What's your preference?
Well, first of all, it wasn't made lightly, but it would indicate a level of interest in the property. So that was all I indicated, and the council was needing to sell property. So that is a healthy thing.
The question is, so where does the local board sit if there's competition?
Well, we would work with all parties, but I think all parties actually would be working with Ngāti Paoa anyway. So I think that Ngāti Paoa owning it, I think Hayden was very clear that this isn't, that they are working closely with the local board and are working with social need. So, and they also have social housing and health kind of sitting at the top of their priority list. So I don't see it as out of the ballpark for all three of those parties to be working together within a joint venture, or one or two or three of them. So I think that's a good thing and a healthy thing, and the local board sits intent on meeting social need through this property.
And so just supplementary, Madam Chair, so Kath, do you think then, you feel that's good, do you think all of those entities are willing to work together for a common outcome?
I think all three already do. work in so I think Julie Cairns indicated how closely they're working with the Piratahi Marae Haora, which is the other health centre and advocacy centre in Waiheke. They do already complement each other. So that indicates that they are very good at working, and I know personally that they're intent on working with Māori. So the Housing Trust already does. And Ngāti Paoa is intent on supporting Waiheke's development and supporting its social needs. So I think that and certainly Ngāti Paoa are a very good collaborator from our perspective. Does that answer that, Councillor Cooper?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Next question, Member Wilcox, Patai.
Can you hear me? I kore au e tautoko I tō kōrero ko te poari te hononga o ngā tāngata e hakataitai ana mo te whenua kē te kaupapa. Engari kua hokia te rangatiratanga kia pāwa e te krauna. E hā te kaupapa pāwa ki a koutou, and pēhea tō mahi kia whakakiko I tēnā.
Kia ora. What he said was, I disagree with the local board assertion, that it's the commonality. It is really the wanting of the land. The Crown have returned rangatiratanga to Paoa. What have Paoa said to the local board, and how has the board worked to make it happen?
So with respect to the second part of that, which is the question, Paoa are keen to work with the local board. We have recently, the local board supported just last week Plan Change 22 in the Hauraki Gulf Islands District Plan to note sites of cultural significance to Paoa in the Rangihaua catchment. And just this week, we are also working with them to recognise their aspirations for Matiatia, which is a site of cultural significance. So the board and Paoa have a very good working relationship. It has been more difficult, which you'll appreciate, I'm sure, Mr. Wilcox, that it's been difficult when there are the two entities of Ngāti Paoa. So the board has, through officers and directly, worked with both Paoa boards, and we have supported both boards, and we are working with the Ngāti Paoa Iwi Trust on a number of significant issues to Waiheke.
Kia ora, thank you. Final question, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And kia ora, Chair Kath. Thank you for your time earlier this week on this matter. So there is, I think you are correct, that there is a degree of purpose around the entities that are involved in this bit of land to have a crack at it. In our discussions, you indicated that there would be you could come up with a go, no-go proposal probably within 3 months, say by the F&P meeting in December. And if it was a no-go, then the land would be offered to other parties. But if it was a go that you do think you could progress it, that you would then go into more detailed feasibility and economic viability study. Is that pretty much the case where we're at?
Yes, I would expect the parties to move pretty quickly into the feasibility. There is a major issue in that the land is contaminated. It can be decontaminated. That liability sits with council, which is going to affect whether it's sold to downers or not. So understand, it's really important up front that these entities know the market value, and they know whether the market value, which should be inclusive of the decontamination cost. So I guess that is really vital to us, Deputy Mayor, as a start point. But I agree with your framework that really, if once they know that that's the key, then they should be able to, by December, we should have a very clear idea whether this is likely to go or not, and in which case we can come back to the Finance and Performance Committee and report where we're up to.
Thanks, Kath. I think the issue of the contaminated land is a matter of how deep is the contamination and the cost. Private sector know all too well what it costs to decontaminate land once they understand the depth of the contamination, and that can be ascertained quite quickly. So thank you for that, and look forward to actually solve the item later on in the meeting. Cheers.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor.
Kia ora. Well then, with no further questions, I would like to move thanks from Chair Handley. Do I have a seconder, Councillor Coombe? Thank you. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Now we move on to our final local board input, this time from the Albert Eden Local Board. Chair Watson, are you with us?
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
So's my kuri. Atamaria, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. E mahi ana te poare arohi o Oaraka Mangawhau i te kaunihera o Tāmaki Makaurau, ko Margie Watson tōku ingoa. Thank you. I'm the chair of the Albert Eden Local Board and here to talk to you about the planned divestment of Wiremu Street. So I wanted to thank the committee for the earlier opportunity to talk about the site and the issues for that site and the lost opportunities that will be incurred by the divestment of this property in Balmoral, and really urge you to either seek a time extension to that decision or to simply decline the recommendation to get some better outcomes in use. So I really wanted to ensure that the advice that the governing body received is really full, robust advice. There are gaps in the advice, and I at the previous meeting, I raised some of those issues. We see that there are significant gaps in the community, and this is one that will just make the situation even worse. We have a broker working in Balmoral, and she has been identifying both the current need for community organisations in the area or for shared space to activate and bring people together. And it also works with the growth that we know is starting to happen in the area that's come through intensification in the unitary plan, plus also that potential growth that's about to hit us through the implementation of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, because the location of the site is on the transit corridor, and it's a walkable distance. So growth will be potentially more significant than was proposed through the unitary plan. So with those gaps in that network, we continue to see demand for that space exceeding supply, and across Aotearoa, we have several community spaces, and only as recently as Tuesday, we had a offer for a community space that we all offered to a community group, being the Aotearoa Resettlement Community Coalition, which is a coalition of a whole lot of people and organisations that work in the refugee space. We had 5 applicants wanting to use that space, all valid community organisations trying to do the work that builds on what we want to see happen through the Auckland plan and through our local board plan. You know, we had to decline 4 of those groups. We could only give it to one group. And then just as recently, the staff plan that's been brought to us regarding the restructuring of the location of local board offices. And, you know, that may leave the Albert Eden local board homeless in its own rohi. So it just feels like there are gaps in the advice, and there's gaps regarding capturing the views of the local board who actually know the local really well. And if we're looking forward, we also need a home as a local board where we are based in our local board area so that we're accessible to our community. And if we are removed from our current office building, then we do need somewhere to go locally. So tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui. Thank you. Happy to take any questions, Madam Chair.
Kia ora, Chair. Thank you for that. Any questions?
Yep.
Councillor Casey. Patai.
Yeah, thanks, Margie. Look, I'm interested in what has happened since the last time we discussed this issue of Wirramoo Street. I raised the issue at the time in our workshop that there seemed to be a disparity between the views of the local board and the officer advice. I still have that feeling. Can you tell me when was the last time you had an in-depth discussion with the staff regarding Wirramoo Street? And I mean the staff who are doing the asset recycling, if you understand my question.
Sure. Not this year, and definitely not since the workshop. So I know there was a comment in the workshop about had the chair even had the opportunity to go into the building. No, we haven't, but you can look outside and imagine what it's like inside the building. It was 2016. There was any in-depth discussion with anyone regarding the use of the site, and out of that, those resolutions from that meeting, we asked that the governing body considered further use of that building to retain it until some work was done, and the governing body requested that further investigation was done, that there was liaison and work done with the seniors advisory panel, and to look at the opportunities there. None of that work was done and reported back to our board or shared with our board. So I guess that's a 4-year gap at least.
Thanks, Margaret. I'm very disappointed to hear that, but I do have a supplementary question. The news that you've just delivered to the governing body members that that you may be asked to leave your office to go somewhere else is news to me and presumably news to everybody in this room. Can you just tell me a bit more about that?
So there is work being done by in the background regarding the alignment of local board officers and where they should be across the region. It has significant impact for at least half the local boards. And I would strongly urge the governing body members to keep that in mind if they're looking to divest this property, because I think it is the right of every community to be able to access their local board and have a hub for their local board in their local board rohi. And if the plans that are being discussed and were mentioned to me on Monday by staff at a briefing come to fruition, then the Albert Eden local board's no longer in Albert Eden.
So, forgive me, where would you be?
That's a question for staff, probably, in their proposal, but
Thanks
not
very
in
much.
Albert Eden.
So I just want to be very clear that there are two bits of thought here. One is on divestment of these properties and the second is local board officers. So, yeah.
I just, Madam Chair, I just think it's the opportunity
I see
to
what
think.
you're saying,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Any other Patai? No, then I'd like to thank Madam Chair very much, Margie, for your presentation. Kathy, would you like to second that? Councillor Casey?
Delighted, thank you.
Great. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Thank you.
Good, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no